Hello, I am back again and I'm going to read the very first chapter on this King George book. So I am going to read to you the life of King George V, and this is when he was a sailor prince. So if you can just take a look at some of these pictures, let's see if we can find a picture when he was a young sailor. Um, well, anyways. Yeah, that's the closest I can come to a young picture. That was his brother. He was the firstborn, and he was supposed to be, his name was Eddie, and he was supposed to be the king, but then he died of like an influenza or a flu or what have you. And, he actually was born premature, and Queen Alexandra had some difficult pregnancies. He was born very, very premature, as a child. Um, King George wasn't as premature. He had actually a good constitution. But anyway, I will get started because this is 25 pages and it's very interesting to read about his life. So this chapter is chapter 1. It's called The Sailor Prince. At 3:30 in the morning, Queen Victoria wrote in her journal on 3 June 1865. She was quite startled by being brought 2 telegrams, which they said, "I must have." They were from Bertie, announcing that dear Alex had been taken ill and then had been safely delivered of a boy at 1:30 this morning. It was thus that the second son of Prince and Princess of Wales, or later King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, was born at Marlborough House, London, a month before his time. Yeah, see, he was premature also. Alexandra had, I think she wanted a lot more kids than she did, so she had these premature births. Such improvidence was out of character. The rest of his long life was to be governed by precedent and punctuality. As to the names of the young gentlemen, the Prince of Wales wrote to the Queen a few days after his wife's confinement. We had both for some time settled that, if we had another boy, he would be called George, as we liked the name, and it is an English one. He proposed that his son should also bear the name Frederick, much used by his wife's ancestors, the kings of Denmark. The Queen, still haunted by memories of her disreputable uncles, King George IV and Frederick, the Duke of York, replied, "I fear I cannot admire the names you propose to give the baby. I had hoped for some fine old name. Frederick is, however, the best of the two, and I hope you will call him so. George only came in with the Hanoverian family. However, if the dear child grows up good and wise, I shall not mind what his name is. Of course, you will add Albert at the end, like your brothers. As you know, we settled long ago that all dearest papa's male descendants should bear that name, to mark our line, just as I wish all the girls to have Victoria after theirs." Well, that George name has sure stuck with George V, George VI, and now it was in the names of Charles's 4 names. And now we have a little Prince George of Wales. So that's quite interesting how they've turned the negatives of the Hanoverian Georges into the positives. Since the marriage of 2 years earlier of Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, to Princess Alexandra of Denmark, Queen Victoria had exercised more than the usual prerogatives of a grandmother. Soon after the birth in 1864 of their son, whom the parents dutifully called Prince Albert Victor, she had written, Bertie should understand what a strong right I have to interfere in the management of the child or children. This time the young father proved more stubborn. We are sorry to hear that you don't like the names that we propose to give our little boy, he told the Queen, but they are names that we like and have decided on for some time. He was dutiful enough, however, to add the name Albert to those of his own choice. On July 7th, 1865, in St. George's Chapel, Windsor, the child was christened George Frederick Ernest Albert. Growing up in the somber middle years of his grandmother's reign, he could count himself fortunate in his parents. At the time of Prince George's birth, his father was 23. His mother was not yet 21. The Prince of Wales, recalling the harsh discipline imposed on him by the archetypal Victorian papa, the Prince Consort, proved a genial and indulgent father. He declined to endorse the educational methods of his own youth, a system that stretched young minds beyond their natural capacity, equated bewilderment with disobedience, clouded the bright horizons of childhood with a mist of tears. The more relaxed regime favored by the Prince of Wales ensured a deeply affectionate and highly spirited family circle such as he himself had hardly ever experienced as a boy. For the first time in a century or more, the dynastic tensions that traditionally separated one generation of the royal house from another gave way to love and respect. Historians have been reluctant to acknowledge the virtue in the Prince of Wales. They conceded that he was punctilious in correspondence, stylish in his public duties, eager to bear a heavier burden of statecraft than the Queen would entrust to him. Yet they qualify these merits with disparagement. His pleasures and his extravagances are recorded with scandalized delight, sports, gambling, and gluttony by day, creaking floorboards in the country houses by night. His angry resentment at slovenly standards of ceremonial or dress is contrasted with the tolerance he brought to the moral and intellectual failings of friends. He does not get on with me, nor indeed much with any but chatty, fast people. The straight-laced Lady Frederick Cavendish wrote of him. Queen Victoria herself also expressed alarm at the exposure of her grandchildren to what she called fashionable society. The children themselves would have been mystified by such reproaches. Their father's bellowing rage might ring down the corridors of Marlborough House at some lapse of protocol or sudden check to his plans, but never at the peccadilloes of nursery or schoolroom. Throughout a life that was sometimes selfish and always restless, he loved to have his family about him, cared for their happiness, and protected their interests. When Harry Laborge, the MP, opposed increases in grants to the royal family, the Prince of Wales indignantly asked whether he was expected to drown his children like puppy dogs as soon as they were born. No, sir, said Laborge replied, but your Royal Highness should live within your own income. Weighted against the prince's paternal concern, the radical voice of reason fails to convince. I was brought up in an age of beautiful women, King George V liked to tell his family, and two of the most beautiful of all were the Empress Elizabeth of Austria and my own mother. The uncritical admiration which the Princess of Wales inspired in her adopted country never wavered through 6 decades. Tennyson greeted her betrothal in 1863 with the celebrated lines, Sea King's daughter from over the sea, Alexandra. Saxon and Norman and Dane are we, but all of us Danes in our welcome of thee, Alexandra. When you read through both of these books, and I read through a book on Edward VII, um, Princess Alexandra was the people's princess of her time. She was very beautiful. She died in 1925 as Queen Mother, more fragile but hardly less captivating in radiance of her youth. Her eyes were luminous in their darkness, a nose too delicate and but merely pretty, lips never far from laughter. She had a bewitching chin that in displeasure could become not so much determined as positively imperious. Such were the features set in a perfect oval of a face and crowned by hair whose luster survived even the coquettish ringlets of a Victorian toilette. Princess Alexandra carried herself gracefully, and she wore both clothes and jewels with stylish confidence. Yet she was no slave to fashion. Shortly before her coronation as queen, she wrote to an officious courtier, I know better than all the milliners and the antiquaries. I shall wear exactly what I like, and so shall my ladies. Basta! Nor can she be identified with the unnamed, very great lady who once assured the diarist Augustus Hare, the conscience of being well dressed gives me an inward peace which religion could never bestow. You do have a sense of, of peace when you're very well dressed. My mom used to always say, when you look good, you feel good. So that must be what she's implying here. Um, in 1867, the Prince George was not yet 2 years old. The Princess of Wales gave birth to her third child, Louise. The confinement was complicated by rheumatic fever, which left her with a slight but permanent limp. She looked on as no more than a mild misfortune. Indeed, some considered it a becoming attribute in so beautiful a woman. It was the prelude, however, to a more tragic consequence, a progressive and ultimately total deafness. The princess bore her affliction with courage, refusing to curtail her charitable and other public duties. Okay, that is something else. That is refusing to curtail her charitable and other public duties. That is the stoicness of the time, of the era. You just carried on. Year by year, however, she was increasingly obliged to withdraw from that demanding social world of which she and her husband were the acknowledged leaders. Opera and the theater became more spectacles. The conversational delights of wit and allusion, of epigram and repartee, were lost to her forever, although she was skillful in disguising how little she heard. The time came when only a few familiar voices could penetrate her prism of silence. A husband endowed with imagination and patience might have done more to sustain his wife through her ordeal. But the Prince of Wales, although affectionate by nature, could not bring himself to modify, much less abandon, his pursuits of pleasure. The princess found consolation less in his company than in home and family, in flowers and animals, and the tranquility of country life. Yet one sure refuge of the deaf was denied her. She never acquired the habit of reading, nor in truth had her husband. The melancholy thing, Lady Lady Frederick Cavendish confided to her diary, is that neither he nor the darling princess ever cared to open a book. But whereas the prince could learn the ways of the world in conversation, thus in time acquired a shrewdness of judgment for those about him, but his wife could not. She radiated every generous instinct, but she bubbled with humor and fantasy. She won every heart. Her mind, however, remained that of an adolescent. Okay. Long after her children had embarked upon lives of their own, she clung to the endearments of the cradle. She would write to Prince George, with a great big kiss for your lovely little face. Her son was then a bearded naval officer of 25 in command of a gunboat. It caused him no embarrassment. Well into manhood, he would begin his own letter to her, my own darling, sweet, beloved mother dear, and end them with, your loving Georgie. The princess's mawkish style did not exclude common sense. Even Queen Victoria recognized her instance upon great simplicity and absence of all pride in the upbringing of her children. They also acquired from her an uncomplicated Christianity and habits of devotion that sustained them throughout life. The princess was less well equipped to expand their minds, to rouse their curiosity, and to unveil the joys of literature and the arts. Their intellectual progress was slow and reluctant. I am not a professor like my grandfather, Prince George admitted in middle age. It was hardly a boast, nor was it exactly a confession of failure. By 1869, the family of the Prince and Princess of Wales was complete. It consisted of 2 boys and 3 girls, all born between January 1864 and November 1869. A sixth child, born in 1871, survived only a few hours. The eldest, christened Albert Victor, but known as Eddie, was created the Duke of Clarence in Avondale in 1890, less than 2 years before his premature death. Then came George. He was born 1865 to 1936. Of the 3 daughters, Louise, 1867 to 1931, was married to the first Duke of Fife, a Scottish landowner. Victoria was born 1868 to 1935, and she remained a spinster. Maud, 1869 to 1938, whom the family called Harry, because the wife of Prince Charles of Denmark, elected in 1905 to the throne of Norway, she became the wife of Prince Charles of Denmark, elected in 1905 to the throne of Norway as King Haakon VII. The formal education of 2 young princes began in 1871 with the appointment of Reverend John Neil Dalton as their tutor. He was then a bachelor, and he was 32 years old. Son of the Vicar Milton Keynes in Buckinghamshire, he had taken first-class honors in theology at Cambridge. He followed by holy orders. It was a curate, Canon Protho, rector of Whippingham near Osborne, that he had attracted the notice of that observant parishioner, Queen Victoria. Without her express approval, he would never have been chosen to supervise the schooling of her grandsons. His qualifications were in every sense Victorian. He was a kind but firm disciplinarian, well-informed and industrious, with a high regard for neatness and order. He also resembled the pedagogue of fiction. It was in resonant and rarely silent voice which he bequeathed to his own son, Chancellor of the Executor in the Labor government in 1945. Throughout his 14 years with Prince Eddie and Prince George, Dalton displayed character as much as intelligence. He did not flinch from the scrutiny of a sovereign who was sometimes less than enchanted with his pupils. "They are such ill-bred, they are ill-trained children," she complained in 1872. "I cannot fancy them all." Nor did he willingly allow his timetable of lessons to be interrupted by an indulgent father and a doting, impulsive, incurable, unpunctual mother. Only when the Prince and Princess of Wales left Dalton alone with his pupils in the country could he be certain of his planned program. In 1874, the royal parents traveled to Russia for a family wedding. From Sandringham, the Prince of Wales estate in Norfolk, Dalton reported to the ever-watchful Queen Victoria. Dalton said, "The two little princes ride on ponies for an hour each alternate morning in the week, and they take a walk the other 3 days, and in the afternoon also their Royal Highness takes exercise on foot. As regards to the studies, the writing and the reading and the arithmetic are all progressing favorably. The music, the spelling, the English history, the Latin, the geography, and French all occupy a due share of their Royal Highnesses' attention." To Dalton justice, there were rowdier moments in that seemingly severe regime. Many years later, when King George V walked into the grounds of Sandringham, which he loved more than any other place on earth, he would pause at a certain point and recall, "It was here that Dalton used to teach us to shoot with a bow and an arrow, and down there that he ran when he allowed us to shoot at him as the running deer." Not until Prince George was 12 did he receive a more lethal weapon, the first of many dedicated to a lifelong pursuit of game. Meanwhile, there were happy hours of swimming and skating, cricket and lawn, tennis and croquet. One problem clouded the plans of the parents and tutor. The Wales children were a sickly brood. "Most wretched," Queen Victoria wrote of them, "except Georgie, who was always merry and rosy. A sturdy, handsome, lively boy, though small for his age, he showed to a particular advantage against his taller but lethargic elder brother." Their mother worried by disparity, and would again and again warn George against irritating and quarreling with Eddie, 16 months his senior, and in direct line of succession to the throne. George's character was no more perfect than that of other boys of 11. He was fretful of temper, he had self-approbation, and were among the faults ponderously recorded by Dalton in a big bound volume. But he did take his mother's admonition to heart. Throughout years of shared education, it was the younger brother who watched over the elder with protective affection. And the second son of the heir apparent, Prince George, had always been destined for a career in the Royal Navy. The Queen and his parents therefore agreed that in the autumn of 1877 he should join the training ship Britannia as a naval cadet. The backwardness of Prince Albert Victor, however, and his dependence on Prince George had complicated this decision. It would be undesirable for Eddie to continue his education alone in the seclusion of Sandringham. Relieved only by short periods in London and occasional visits to his grandmother in Scotland and the Isle of Wight. Rather, must he rub shoulders with boys of his own age and acquire something of the social ease which is required of royal personages. The Queen favored Wellington College, the public school founded in 1859 to commemorate England's greatest soldier and much commended by the Prince Consort. At this point in the discussion, Dalton intervened. In a tactful memorandum, he reminded the Queen of the relationship between the two brothers. Prince Albert Victor, he requires the stimulus of Prince George's company to induce him to work at all. The mutual influence of their characters on one another, totally different as they are in many ways, is very beneficial. Difficult as the education of Prince Albert Victor is now, it would be doubly and trebly so if Prince George were to leave him. Prince George's lively presence is his mainstay, and it is a chief incentive to exertion. And to Prince George again, the presence of his elder brother is most wholesome as a check against the tendencies to self-conceit which is apt at its times to show itself in him. Away from his brother, there would be a great risk of his being made too much of and treated as a general favorite. Dalton concluded the best course would be for the elder brother to join the younger in Britannia. It would, he asserted, help Prince Albert Victor to develop those habits of promptitude and method, of manliness and self-reliance, in which he is now somewhat deficient. The mind of Queen Victoria never ceases to astonish. Far in advance of his aristocratic court, she held views unknown to those who have pursued her memory with braying laughter. She detested the heartlessness of bureaucracy. She defied the prejudices held by so many of her subjects against humble origins, or dark skin, or unfamiliar creed. Her reaction to Dalton's plea was no less startling. Although the very focus and epitome of patriotism, she responded in terms which would have captivated the League of Nations Union half a century later. Okay, let's just review this. Queen Victoria in her time, she really didn't, this is really a key piece right here. Because while Meghan Markle claims that there's racism in the royal family, this right here just shows you, going back to Queen Victoria's time, how she was very empathetic to her subjects of humble origin or dark skin or of unfamiliar creed. This is just goes to show you that from very early on that they really tried to embrace people of all cultures, of all class. So I think they were very empathetic to their subjects of all culture, all class, all ethnicity. So to me, that refutes her claim for racism. And people were excited for Harry and Meghan to get married, but you are what you are. But so, okay, going back to, will a nautical education not engender and encourage national prejudices and make them think that their own country is superior to another? With the greatest love for and pride of one's own country, a prince, and especially one who is some day to be its ruler, should not be imbued with prejudices and peculiarities of his own country, as George III and William IV were. The Queen nevertheless allowed herself to be persuaded that the two boys should be joining the Britannia. In September 1877, as an experiment, they were accompanied by Mr. Dalton in the role of resident tutor. The training ship was a comfortless vessel that had survived from Nelson's day, and now it lays anchor in the River Dart in Devon. The only privilege which the Royal Cadets enjoyed was to sling their hammocks in a private cabin. Prince George was at first known to his shipmates as Sprat, a diminutive of the Wales, later by the more respectable sobriquet of PG. He rapidly acquired a seaman-like skill in handling and sailing boats, and he found advanced mathematics was no obstacle. In November 1877, Dalton was writing confidently to the Queen. It's impossible the two lads could be more robust health or happier than the two princes are. Prince George's own account of life in Britannia was less rhapsodic. In old age, he told his librarian, Sir Owen Morshead, "It never did me any good to be a prince, I can tell you, and many was the time I wish I hadn't been. It was a pretty tough place, and so far from making an allowance for our disadvantages, the other boys made a point of taking it out on us on the grounds that they'd never be able to do it later on." There was a lot of fighting among the cadets, and the rule was that if challenged, you had to accept. So they used to make me go up and challenge the bigger boys. I was awfully small then, and I'd get a hiding time again and again. But one day I was landed a blow on the nose which made my nose bleed badly. I was the It was the best blow I'd ever took, for the doctor forbid me from fighting any more. Then we had a sort of a tuck shop on land up the steeple hill, only we weren't allowed to bring any edibles into the ships, and they used to search you as you came on board. Well, the big boys used to fag me to bring them back a whole lot of stuff, and I was always found out, and I got into trouble in addition to having stuff confiscated. And the worst of it was always my money. They never paid me back. I suppose they thought there were plenty more where that came from. But in point of fact, we were only given a shilling a week of pocket money, so it meant a lot to me, and I can tell you, there were many times, too, of acute homesickness, as when he wrote to his mother in red ink from HMS Britannia, "Please give Victoria my very best love and many kisses, and mind you, kiss her properly like I would." Was there Because I am sure that when I send kisses to people in your letter, you never kiss them. The Prince of Wales replied in a letter that combined affectionate greetings of his 14th birthday with an intimidable touch of tactlessness. Victoria says, "So old and so small. Oh my, you will have to make haste to grow, or I shall have that sad disgrace of being the mother of a dwarf. But let me wish you many happy returns on that dear day, which we ought to spend together always." As the training of the two princes in Britannia drew to a close, their further education continued to agitate grandmother, parents, and tutor. Prince George, it was agreed, would spend the next 2 or 3 years cruising around the world, which is an essential stage of naval career. Whether his elder brother ought to again accompany him was less clear. The past 2 years was not noticeably improved by Prince Eddie's vitality. It is physically it is to physically cause is it is to physical causes, Dalton told the Prince of Wales in April 1879, that one must look for an explanation of the abnormally dormant condition of his mental powers. Perhaps a further period of naval routine, with the added stimulus of sea air and foreign landscapes, would awaken the torpid personality. Prince George's lively company was once more thought to be an essential part of the treatment. Yet, what if the ship in which they sailed were overwhelmed by a sudden disaster? The simultaneous deaths of two boys would be both a family tragedy and a needless hazard in the lottery of hereditary rule. Should they not go to sea in separate ships after all? The initial suggestion that the princes should embark together in HMS Bechant, a corvette of 4,000 tons, fully rigged but with auxiliary engines, precipitated one of those distinctive royal disturbances which punctuate the Victorian age. It involved the Queen, the Prince of Wales, their respective private secretary, the Prime Minister, and the First Lord of the Admiralty, and the Captain of Bechant, Lord Charles Scott. Ponsonby Master, with a pithy memorandum noting course. Item 1, plan proposed to the Queen, who did not like it at all. Dalton sent by the Prince of Wales to urge it. Queen objections not pressed. Unanimous condemnation by the Cabinet of the plan. Indignation by the Queen and the Prince at their interference. Cabinet said they didn't. Plan adopted. Controversies on the selection of the officers. The Queen supported what she believed to be the Prince of Wales' choice. Sometimes it appeared he wished for others. Final agreement on the officers. Bechant announced to the ship who chose her. When and where, I don't know. Chorus of approbation. Strong whispers against her. No stability. The Queen doubtful. The Prince of Wales doubtful. Dalton very doubtful. Prefers Newcastle. Smith is furiously, outwardly calm, offers to turn over crew to Newcastle, an old ship full of bilge water, sends a report in favor of Bechant. Scott ordered to cruise in search of storm so as to see if she will capsize. Scott returns, says she didn't. Dalton is not satisfied, wants to separate the princesses. Queen says this is what she first thought of. Dalton said it was impossible. Let him consult Prince and Princess of Wales. Queen mentions doubt to Lord Beaconsfield. B observes he has already snubbed, but if his advice is wanted, he will give it. Noel says Dalton is wrong. The Queen ultimately decided that her grandsons should sail together in Bechant, whatever the supposed risk. Dalton's, unnerved by weeks of wrangling and an apparent loss of royal confidence, offered his resignation. He was persuaded to withdraw it only just in time to join the two naval cadets on their maiden voyage. The warship he was so mistrusted, just as it turned out, left Spithead for the Mediterranean on 17 September 1879. For the next 3 years, the Bechant was the princess's home. The 3 voyages they made in her took them around the world. The first lasted from September 1879 until May 1980. Spithead, Gibraltar, the Balearic Islands, Palermo, Gibraltar, Madeira, Barbados, Grenada, Martinique, Jamaica, Bermuda, and then back to Spithead. In the course of it, if the princes were promoted to the rank of midshipmen, the second voyage was a short cruise to Spain and Ireland in the summer of the 1880s. The third was with Admiral Lord Clanwilliam's detached squadron from September 1880 until August 1882. Spithead, Madeira, Montevideo, Buenos Aires, Falkland Islands, Cape of Good Hope, Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Japan, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Ceylon, Egypt, Palestine, Greece, Italy, Spain, Gibraltar, and so back to England. 3 years in a warship was an exacting education for any boy between the age of 14 and 17, yet not unprecedented even among princes. Exactly a century earlier, the future King William IV had gone to sea on the HMS Royal George, accompanied by the Reverend Henry Magendie, the Mr. Dalton of his day. It was perhaps with some prompting from his tutor that the 14-year-old Prince William wrote to his father, King George III, on November 1779. He said, I hope I am in the way of proving an honor to my country and a comfort to my parents, that my moral conduct is not infected by a great deal of vice I have seen, nor my manners more impolite by the roughest peculiar to most seamen. Dalton was similarly anxious to protect his charges from the moral perils of the deep. He had insisted that the officers of the Bachant should be chosen as much as for their steadiness of character as for the qualities of seamanship. The list appears decidedly aristocratic. The captain was Lord Charles Scott, a son of the Duke of Buccleuch. The commander, George Hill, a kinsman of the Viscount Hill, who had succeeded Wellington as commander in chief of the army. Among the lieutenants was Assheton Curzon Howe, son of the Earl of Howe, and bearer of the name renowned in British naval history. The midshipmen included William Peel. He was the great nephew of the Prime Minister, and John Scott, who's the nephew of Lord Charles Scott, and he himself was the future Duke of Buccleuch. The cadets could claim a son of the Duke of Leeds, a son of Viscount Harding, and one of the Queen's aides de camp, and Rosalind Weymouth, the future admiral of the fleet, who was the great grandson of King William IV by his mistress, Mrs. Jordan. The quality of these officers was reflected in a contented lower deck. In Australia, the squadron of 5 ships lost 108 of its 1,700 men by desertion. Only one belonged to Bachant. Prince George and his brother enjoyed few privileges. They shared a cabin. They could call on the services of Charles Fuller, the Sandringham footman, who was promoted to be their personal attendant. They were excused from boat duty in a stormy weather. Those meager concessions, however, were outweighed by the demands of their conscientious tutor. In the afternoon runs a typical extract from Prince George's diary. We had the bar up for gymnastics as usual, and afterwards in the evening we went on reading about free trade and protection. The journal was not the least of his tasks. After a false start in 1878, which lasted less than 2 weeks, he began again on May the 3rd, 1880, and continued a sparse but unbroken record until 3 days before his death. Written in a clear schoolboy hand that had hardly changed in a half century, it reveals the methodical pattern which governed his leisure as well as his work. He breathed little life and no color into his discreet daily chronicle. The perspectives of history failed to move him. He was enthralled less than by events than by their anniversaries, which he noted again and again. Thus, on the 6th of August, 1935, we joined Bachant 56 years ago today. Each morning, whether on land or at sea, he recorded the direction of the wind and other meteorological detail. It is ideal for his biographer to sigh for the richest fare of Peps and gravy. Prince George belonged to a generation of sailors who depended upon the weather for their lives. By the age of 15, he had faced both danger and death. Between South Africa and Australia, the Bachant ran into a severe gale. His sails in the ribbons, his rudder almost torn off at the shaft. She drifted helplessly out of touch with the other ships of the squadron and 400 miles from the nearest port. For 3 days and nights, the senior officers, they had no sleep until makeshift repairs allowed the corvette to limp on her way. Prince George's account of the storm is that of a seasoned professional, untinged by emotion. Earlier, however, on successive days in the South Atlantic, a seaman had fallen to his death. One from the fore topsail yard of Bachant, the other overboard from the flagship Inconstant. The prince was deeply moved by the loss of his shipmate, and he drew a neat black border around his diary for that day. These were not the only tragedies on the voyage. Here, Dalton describes an eerie episode as Bashant cruised between Melbourne and Sydney. At 4 a.m., the Flying Dutchman crossed our bows, a strange red light as of the phantom ship all aglow, in the midst of which the light, the mast, the spars, the sails of the brig 200 yards distant stood out in the strong relief as she came up on the port bow. The lookout man on the forecastle reported her as close on the port bow, where also the officer of the watch from the bridge clearly saw her, as did also the quarter-deck midshipman, who was sent forward at once to the forecastle, but on arriving there was no vestige, nor any sign whatsoever of any material ship was to be seen either near or right away to the horizon. The night being clear, the sea calm, 13 persons altogether saw her. At 10:45 a.m., the ordinary seamen who had this morning reported the Flying Dutchman fell from the foreman toppost crosstrees onto the topgallant forecastle and was smashed to atoms. Almost at the end of the cruise, a Bashant made her way home through the Mediterranean. Prince George's friend, John Scott, fell from under the maintop nearly 40 feet. He was providentially brought up by the leg within a few feet on the deck by a couple cross side ropes, or he must have been killed. The prince did not allow such memories to haunt him, a fellow midshipman had later recalled. I was shipmates for 5 years with our late king, and when we were both youngsters, the companionship in one of Her Majesty's gun rooms in those days was a necessity, a very close and intimate one. Weeks and weeks at sea, sometimes very monotonous weeks, living on food that was more than monotonous and also exceedingly nasty, mostly salt pork and chips biscuits. Remember, there were no comforts in those days, no such thing as electrical freezing plants, so fresh vegetables, fruit, and fresh provisions lasted a very, very short time after leaving harbor. Also, one got rather bored at always seeing the same old faces around the same old table, and tempers at times were apt to get a little frayed and irritable. Yet in all those years, I never remember Prince George losing his temper. I certainly never had even a cross word with him. Unselfish, kindly, good tempered, he was an ideal shipmate. So I'm going to pause it here because there are 10 more pages. I'm going to break this chapter up into another episode. So if you want to listen to that, I will label it Episode 2, Chapter 1 of The Sailor Prince. That way you can have a bit of a break from listening, and it's quite a long chapter, but as you can see, it's very interesting into the character and type of person Prince George was during this time, and how his steadiness, his was such an enormous help to his older brother, and how they always had them sail together, study together in order to keep Eddie motivated. So it's a very interesting book. So I hope that you'll continue listening or read about King George on your own, because it's a fascinating time. And I will see you in the next episode.